Hey SCRUF buddies, my SCRUF friends. This video is focused on how to identify your ideal client. Why we want to identify our ideal client? Well, the first thing is because SCRUF wants to have a sustainable business. We want people who are in SCRUF to be members for a long time. We want, and in order for someone to be a member for a long time, they have to be happy. If you're working with clients who don't make you happy, then you're not going to want to keep working with SCRUF for a long time. So, and a big part of working with clients that make you happy is figuring out who the heck those people are. And that's what this exercise is designed to do. We want to prevent burnout of SCRUF members. We want SCRUF members to be happy for a long time. Another thing that's a bit more practical about identifying your ideal client is figuring out what kind of referrals you want. So within SCRUF, when we get inquiries, we need to know kind of who to send them to. And also, if you know your ideal client, then we know where to find them so we can actually attract them to your services so that they'll actually want to sign up with you. But if we don't know who the heck these people are, then it's going to be difficult / impossible to do any of those things. And then you're going to find that you want to just throw it all away, get out of SCRUF. And we want to prevent that. This exercise really complements some of the other exercises that we have, which is identifying your perfect day, doing your identity work, figuring out who you are and your needs. So this is not an independent exercise necessarily. I think it's important to do those other exercises as well so that it'll inform who your ideal client is. Sometimes we try to be too broad when we're identifying our ideal client or like who we'll work with. There's an adage in business, which is if you're advertising to everybody, really you're advertising to nobody. People want to know that the services that you're giving them are specific to them, like they fit their specific needs. So if you're like, I'll do dogs and cats and monkeys and rabbits and any kind of dog, any kind of cat, any location, blah, blah, blah. Like you'll get clients, but first of all, you're not going to get your ideal clients. So you're not going to necessarily stay happy for the long term. And also if you are trying to do specific marketing, then you're just going to get random people or no people because it's not speaking to them. With SCRUF, we have like a kind of a broad marketing message, and this is to figure out what's your specific niche within that broad marketing message. It's a living document, so your ideal client isn't necessarily who you write down today. You're not wedded to it. So you're gonna change the document as you learn more about yourself, as you learn more about what clients you like and don't like. And if you're new to pet care, you might not know the answers to all these things yet, and that's totally fine. That's totally normal. Even people who've been doing pet care for a long time are gonna have a lot to change over time. The more they think about the questions in this worksheet, and also the more they work with clients and figure out like, oh, I really liked that about that client. I really disliked that about that other client. So we can use all our experiences, whether you're brand new or have a lot of experience, to identify and continue modifying who you're trying to reach, who's your ideal client. So even if you're brand new though, you can still draw on your own experiences that you have had so far. So if you have any clues about pet care, which you should by this point, if you're filling out this worksheet, you should have some clue. So you can draw on that experience. Think about your perfect day exercise. Think about your identity work. Ask SCRUF mates kind of what what's important to them and why. It might be different than what's important to you and why, but it might give you some inspiration on kind of how you can think about it. You can base your ideal client on your friends or colleagues. I think that's a really common thing that we do at first. We want to help the people who we relate to the most, and that's where we think we're going to get most of our clients is like, oh, my friend has a dog. But I would say to be careful with this, because people who are your friends aren't necessarily the same people who would be the best clients for you. Like sometimes people have friends who are just like hella broke, and that's totally great for friendship. But if you want to have a sustainable employment, you might need to open that up to people who have a higher income, for example, so that they'll actually pay the rates that you want to actually provide the lifestyle that you need in order to be a good friend to these friends who you love. So be careful about basing it on your friends or colleagues. When you're new to pet care also, you tend to take on any client who will give you the time of day. Partly this is because people are like insecure about the value of their services. They think like they just need to get anyone in and for any rate, because they don't personally see the value of their services, mostly because they're new. It's also partly because we're desperate for money, right? Like, oh shit, I don't know if any clients are ever going to come in, so I should take this client now just to make sure, because I don't think I'm going to get someone better. That's related to like being insecure about the value of your services. It's kind of tied up in that. But it's also like a super legit, like, oh my God, I need to build my client base because my monthly income is going to be way too low. That's totally normal. It's also why we take on any client who will give us the time of day, especially when we're new to pet care, is because we haven't identified our ideal client. So a lot of times, we find like within SCRUF, we've had similar experiences where we take whatever client comes, we get frustrated with that client over time just because they're not ideal for us. And then we have this problem where we're either stuck with a bunch of clients who don't mesh with us and what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish in our services. And that can be frustrating for so many different reasons. One of them being like physical, like if you're walking really big dogs or really aggressive dogs or dogs who who pull a lot or whatever, and you have chronic pain, that is like people within SCRUF totally have chronic pain. I have chronic wrist pain. I had to stop walking big dogs with no training. Even though I can walk them skills-wise, I had to stop doing it just because of my physical limitations. And so that's a problem with my ideal client, taking people who aren't my ideal client. Another thing is we end up ending services with clients because we get to the point where we're either going to be burning ourselves out or we have to just end the services, or both are happening. And so we want to avoid that because it just makes the clients, it's like this long drama thing that lasts months. That's like, when am I going to say it? How am I going to say it? Or like, is it bad enough? Like that's something I get caught in a lot, is like, this is kind of sucky, but is it so bad that I want to like find a new client? So you end up compromising, or like you end up just driving a lot more than you really want to because your client that you take on is outside your service area that you actually want. I know a dog walker who is very sweet, wonderful dog walker, super funny, whatever. They ended up with diverticulitis. I don't even know what diverticulitis is. It's some disease of the gut. But the reason why they did that is because they took all these clients when they first started, 10 years ago. And then they were really great dog walkers, so they were really loyal to their clients. And so they were driving like a maniac, and then just to get through the day. Second of all, they were driving to like Orinda when they were walking dogs in Oakland. So it was like, for them, they had to get this disease in order for them to realize like, oh my God, I need to really cut down my stress. And a big part of my stress is my driving and my client services. So that's kind of an extreme example, but it can totally happen. You know, we want our clients to be happy. We want, like, we might really like the client, really like the dog. It's just out of our driving range or whatever it is. There's all these compromises that we make. And we're going to make compromises, but we just want to minimize that. Because, yeah, like going through this worksheet, this doesn't mean that this is the only client you'll work with. You'll work with clients who aren't your ideal client for sure, but it does mean that this is who you would be super happy to work with, and it's the client who's going to bring you the most joy in your work. And that's really the goal of this exercise. So first, you should do the ideal client worksheet, which is attached to this video. This is your primo perfect client. It doesn't need to be pinned down totally specific. Like, you don't have to know like the exact one breed that would be your ideal client. If you do know that, then that's great, but you don't have to, for example. But any identifiers that you can write down, even if they're broad, will be good to write down. So like, for example, for breeds, don't just write any breed. Like, that's way too broad. That's not an identifier at all. And you don't need to list like all the breeds that you would work with. There's too many. But if you have some clue of the breeds that you like are most attracted to, just try to be as specific as possible. I would say the more specific you can be, the better. So first you'll do this ideal client worksheet, primo client in mind. Then you'll go back and set outer boundaries. And that's going to be a totally different exercise, but it's where you basically say like, okay, here's my ideal client. Here's, for example, the geography of like where I want them to live. And here's where I won't travel. Or like, this is the size, my ideal size dog. And this is my upper limit on my like dogs I won't work with who like weigh more than 50 pounds or whatever it is. So you'll set your outer boundaries, and that's kind of where you'll start. Especially if you're taking on new clients, you're building a new client base. You'll kind of stick with your outer boundaries at first, but always keeping in mind your ideal client who you want to work with, which we're going to work with in our marketing and in other ways as well. So this is a difficult exercise that is real. It's difficult. It's hard. It should be hard if you're doing it. If it doesn't feel difficult, then probably you're not going deep enough into thinking about who your ideal client is. You might just be, and that's fine. Like if you're just basic, like if you have a favorite client now and you just base the whole thing on that, that's totally fine for a first draft. But I think then you need to really get deeper into, like, go back to your perfect day, go back to your identity work and get deeper into who you really want to work with, which might be different than who is your friend or your favorite client that you have now. So go through it once, and then I would say marinate on it and look at it later, like wait a few days or a week, and then look at it again and update it. In that time, in between the few days and a week, think about while you're out doing services or whatever, or just while you're out in your life, think about like what would you change? What is important to you? And then come back and redo the exercise or change it up. It's totally fine to do it a few times before you feel like you have your first draft completed. And then after your first draft is completed, I think it's best to revisit it periodically, like every few months or at least once a year. It's a living document and you can change it at any time. So if you just have an epiphany and you want to change it, then you can totally do that at any time. And I would say at the minimum, we should look at them once a year because you learn so much about services in a year. You can really update this and hone in on your ideal client. A year is kind of a long time, actually. But okay, so now let's go through the document here. So first, at the top, it asks about the pets, dogs or cats or birds or whatever. And then it lists a bunch of sample questions that you could get into to identify the pets. This is important, but I think that we mostly, when we do pet services, a lot of times we focus only on the pets for our ideal client. So we're not going to just stick with pets. We're going to also talk about the human client, because in reality, we interact, I would say, about half and half. Like half of it is like, what's up with the dog or the cat? What's up with the actual services that I actually provide on the day-to-day basis? The other half of like the stress, I guess I would say, that comes with pet care services is like, what's the client about? What's the deal with them? Because even if the dogs are great, you could have really crappy clients, and that just ruins it for you. And I think it's important to not get stuck in just thinking about like, what dogs do I want to work with, because, or whatever pet, because then you get stuck in just like this guilt cycle where you're in love with the dog, you want to help the dog, you know the client is a wreck, and you feel like you're abandoning the dog if you leave the services, so you kind of end up feeling guilty, and that's why you stay with that client even though it's not really making you happy and it's bringing more stress to your life than the income is worth. So we are going to go deep into what the client is about. We start off with some basic stuff like, where are they located? What kind of house do they live in? Is it an apartment? Is it a standalone house? For location, you could seriously put a cross street. You could write a route. For me, I cover a pretty broad part of Oakland and Berkeley and Richmond, but it's on a very tight route. So I wouldn't just write Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond, because that's huge. But I could like write out my route for location. Similarly, you could write just a city name. You could write neighborhood names. Location is kind of, you can identify that yourself. And like I said in a few minutes ago, location is this is our ideal situation. So if it's like, oh man, if I could like not travel outside of this 5-mile radius in a workday, that would be ideal for me. But it doesn't mean that you won't ever take clients outside that radius, because if everything else is perfect, like the dog is great, the client is great, and and the only thing that's wrong is the location, you might flex on the location, or like maybe add in a few dollars to the service price or whatever. So again, just keep in mind, this is our ideal, and we can be flexible with it in real life, and we'll set those outer boundaries. So work type, work hours. What does your client do for work? Do they have a career? Do they have part-time work? Do they work odd hours? Do they work set hours? Are they an entrepreneur? Are they an executive? Do they work at home? Do they work at home some days? Do they never work at home? So work type is pretty broad. So just get creative with that, or just think about what's important to you. This will come up kind of in one big way. This comes up is like what time they need the services, right? So I've had a client who was a nurse, and she didn't work until 3 p.m. and worked late nights. And that was totally fine, but it was kind of complicated with like pickup times, because they would be out with their dog, and I would, I'd have to like text them and be like, hey, I'm on my way. So it was, and they might be out and they'd have to like rush home. So it was kind of complicated as far as that. Another thing too was like they ended up canceling services because they were really interested in like the social aspect and the training aspect. But they didn't really like need a potty break. When they needed a potty break was at like 8 p.m. at night, and that's not my ideal client. So if those two things line up, potty break and social and training, then that's really more ideal for me. So thinking about what's their work hours, what kind of job they do, that will all inform really how the services are. Another thing too is if they work from home a lot, then you're going to be filling a different need than potty break, because they can do the potty breaks pretty easily. And that's totally fine. It just depends on like what need you want to fill and what kind of clients you want to work with. Another thing too is some service providers like don't want to ever run into their clients at the house. So they would prefer that their clients never are home. And sometimes, it's okay if your client is home, because then, for example, when you drop off the dog, you do your update there. So it's like you have less screen time. If you have a client who like wants to text or wants to get updates every walk, you'll have less screen time if you can just like chat with the client for a second in the moment. That can be a problem, though, if you have a really chatty client, or if you get along really well with your client, and you end up like spending 10 minutes like catching up every time you pick up the dog. So every client is different. Like not all clients who work at home are chatty, for example. But just kind of having a general, like, what do you think would be your preference, and how that relates to your services, that'll help you fill out this part of the worksheet. So now we're going to get into like identifying the client themselves. So I would say pick an age range that's within 5 years. This is really, really hard to do. But think about generally in our society and our culture, where are people at in their lives, and what would be your ideal kind of life. And it doesn't have to be like stereotypical, like this is the year, this is the age you get married, this is the age you have kids. It can be alternative, different parts of people's development through life. But pick an age range that's within 5 years. And like I said, this is going to be really hard, but just try. Just nail it down. What's their gender, what's their relationship. This is all going to come up in services. So like for gender, some people like don't ever want to have like just male clients because of their personal life experiences working with men, for example. Or you might want to only have like gender nonconforming clients. You might only want to have like gay clients, or you might only want to have, or these might be your ideal clients. You might want to have only single clients, because then you're dealing with one person. There's a lot that goes into this, all these questions, as far as like how they play out in real life. Kids, do you want them to have kids or not? And then what if you do, that's okay for them to have kids, what ages do you want the kids to be? This comes up as far as like summertime services, if they're going to be home because they're pregnant and have a newborn baby, if you want to do like a maternity leave kind of niche. Then yeah, this all comes up in like, what do you see your services as, and how do you want to interact with your clients? What's their career? How much money do they make? You could just do a quick search online if you're not sure about that. What are their, and just because someone makes more money doesn't mean they're necessarily willing to pay more for services. So just keep that in mind. Don't pick just like the highest income bracket just because you think that they're going to pay more. They have more money to pay more, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to. And that's what going down the second half of this worksheet is going to get at. So what are their interests? What activities do they participate in? What are their attitudes about pet care? These are really big, especially the attitudes about pet care. That's kind of like what are their needs, and what are they going to be kind of looking for while you're doing services. Interests and activities, that's going to help us figure out where the heck they hang out so we can advertise to them, to find them, to get them to be your clients. Now, psychographics. So this is just a quick list. It's definitely not a full list. And try to pick 5 of these. If you need to, pick 10 and then put them in like the most 5 important and least 5 important. This is an interesting part about the worksheet, because I think it's something that is pretty rare. I haven't seen it on very many of these ideal client types of exercises. it's going to help us. It can help us with our advertising depending on the methods that we use to advertise, but it also is going to really help you with your intake. So if you are talking to a client on the phone, you can kind of ask questions to get at these psychographics to figure out kind of what's going on with them. Like, for example, let's say one of your psychographics that you choose is informal. So because you want to be able to show up in your dog walking clothes, which are yucky a lot of the time or ripped or whatever. So you want informal as one of your psychographics. Think about, well, first of all, usually the psychographics have a positive and a negative aspect. So someone who's informal might be totally chill with you showing up in your whatever sweats, but someone who's informal also might not necessarily like tell you ahead of time if they're going out of town, or they might try to schedule services at the last minute, or they might communicate with you in a way that's like too relaxed, feels uncomfortable, or they might have a hard time with like boundaries, like professional boundaries. So all of these have a positive and negative aspect to them, I would say. So think about that when you're choosing your psychographics. I wouldn't necessarily rule out informal, but just be aware that that's part of it. So we'll ask questions on the phone in the intake to kind of get at like what is up with them. Like for informal, if the client is on the phone and they cuss, or if you cuss and you say like, oh, my bad, and they say like, oh, whatever, fuck it, then you know they have some informal is maybe part of why they're okay with cussing. And maybe that's like a clue that, okay, this might be my ideal client. So there's a lot that goes into psychographics, thinking about it, and feel free to add any other psychographics that you think of. Like it might be cool to do a brainstorm on your own of any other psychographics that you can come up with that might relate to pet care, and then look at that whole list, these and the ones that you came up with. I tried to find like a list online of like all examples of psychographics, and I couldn't. So, oh well. You'll have to come up with it from your own creativity. So like I said, also choose 5. If you need to, choose 10 and then do like your 10 most important and 10 least important. You can also circle ones that are like you dislike, like your part of your psychographics are, or like maybe find the opposite of it. Like if you really don't want to work with people who are, I don't know, these are all kind of nice, so I'm not sure which one I would not want to work with. Maybe cautious, but there's good things about cautious, so I don't know. Anyway, you can make a list of ones that you definitely don't want to deal with. So now this next question, who do I care about and want to help the most? That goes back to your identity work. Where are they at in their lives right now? This is interesting. Are they pregnant? Did they just move here? Are they getting ready to move away? Did they just start a new job? What do they want? What do they love other than their dog? So what do they want is also other than their dog. It can include their dog, but we need to think more deeply about what is important to them in their life. Part of this is because it helps us see our own value. So if I can help my client have their dog not potty in the house, that saves them a ton of frustration. It saves them their relationship with their dog. It also saves them a ton of money on like carpet cleaning. And it also, I was speaking on the phone with someone who was like, yeah, I wake up in the morning and I have, my dog messes in the house and I spend half an hour cleaning it. And then I miss class and I was like, well, when you miss class, do you get marks off for that. And he was like, yeah, it affects my grade. And this person's trying to apply to law school. So what do they like? It might seem like, oh, I'm just taking the dog out to pee, like whatever, no big deal. It's not that hard. It's a whatever. You can rationalize it anyway to devalue your job. But thinking about what they want, what do they love other than their dog? What do they fear? What makes them angry? What keeps them awake at night? All these things help us build value in our own minds, and then we're going to use it to build value in our clients' minds, which is really how people pay higher rates. If they see it as just like a potty walk that any high schooler could do, then that's totally fine. We don't want those kinds of clients, or I don't want those kinds of clients, because I'm always going to be in competition with every high schooler on the block. But if they see that it's not just a potty break that any high schooler could do, if they see that I'm reinforcing their training or helping them get into law school, then they're going to really want me to be super reliable, much more reliable than a high schooler, and they're going to be willing to pay me for that reliability, because what they're really paying me for is them getting into law school, if that makes sense. So if you need to, this is a little deep, a little complicated here at the end, but it's all about building value, and it's all about helping the client see really what our services are about in their actual life. Because we often see, like if you're doing a service that you feel yucky about, like you're not getting paid enough for it, then that's you seeing the value of your service, but your client not seeing it. So we need to not only understand our own value, like that's definitely an important step, but we also need to be able to communicate that with our clients. And so thinking about what do they want and what do they fear, that will help us in that process. So go through the worksheet and then go through it again in a few days, and then maybe in a few more days, go through it again. And then after that, then set your outer boundaries. You could set your outer boundaries without finalizing your ideal client. That might help you actually finalize your ideal client. But you want to do all those things. You want to revisit it and set outer boundaries. And then what? I don't remember what I was going to say. Anyway, and then you can revisit any time in the future. So it's not like final set in stone. All right. I hope you have a great time with this exercise, and I can't wait to see what you came up with.